So now what we're going to be talking about is the different types of third-party sensors. So in general, there's a lot of different types of third-party sensors, but the ones that we're going to focus on today are analog sensors. So the first one right here, analog sensors. We're going to go into depth about what that is. Same with digital input and output, so digital sensors, and then I2C or I2C and SPI. So there are a lot of other different types, but these are some of the main types of sensors. And we're going to be talking about, what they are and if you can use them with Phidgets, and if so, how you actually do that. So to get started, we're going to talk about analog sensors. So I have this sensor with me right here. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better. But basically what this is an analog light sensor. So you may have seen a sensor like this if you are using Arduinos in your classroom. But basically, as we can see from the image, it has 3 pins here. And the idea is that depending on how much light is actually hitting the sensing element, a voltage will be generated, and that voltage will be generally between 0 and 5 volts. So in this situation, if there's light hitting the sensor, it will be closer to 0. And as the sensor kind of gets darker, it will be reading higher up, around 4 to 5 volts. So that is kind of the first class of sensor. So there's a ton of different types of these. The next type of sensor that we're going to be looking at today are digital inputs and digital outputs. So essentially, they have a very similar look to the previous one. Here is an example of this one is a switch. So it's a mercury switch. So you can kind of see in this image here, there is a little ball, a little blob of mercury. And basically what happens is I have that here. It's a tilt sensor. So when that mercury kind of slides back and forth, it makes a connection between 2 pins. And that's how you can kind of indicate, that's how it indicates whether it's tilted or not. So very similar to the analog sensors. The only difference is that you only need 2 pins here. So there is 3 pins because these are very inexpensive sensors that aren't very high quality. So they just use the same, kind of header. But essentially you only need 2 pins. You just need a signal and a ground. And again, this is something that you would connect directly to your Vint hub to be able to monitor. So we'll be showing this in a second, but that's kind of the second type is a device that outputs a digital signal that your hub can then read. The last type here that we'll be talking about of sensors that Phidgets can kind of interface with are devices that accept a digital signal. So in the previous step, we had the tilt sensor that outputs a digital signal depending on the state of the switch. And here, this device is an example of a device that accepts a digital signal. So this is a IOT Power Relay. It's available online from many different distributors. But essentially, we can see these green terminal blocks here. And what it's expecting is 2 wires, so a signal wire and a ground wire. And when you turn that wire, when you turn the signal wire on, or you provide a high voltage, 3.3 or 5 volts, it will actually turn on these ports here. So if you have this plugged into power and you provide this a low voltage signal, it will then turn power on to a high voltage device here. So it's super useful. And there's a lot of different devices that are similar to this. So they take a digital signal in. So this is something that, again, you would be able to connect directly to your Vint hub and control. So again, we'll be talking about this in a second and showing you how to actually code against this. The last kind of type of sensor that we talked about previously are I2C or I2C sensors and SPI sensors. So these sensors, it's very easy to see if it is a I2C or SPI sensor because they will always have more than 3 pins. So previously we've been looking at sensors with 2 or 3 pins. So with SPI and with I2C, you'll always see 4, 5, 6 different pins. So if I were again to just take a look at Adafruit's website, so I'm just on Adafruit's website here, and if I just go to products and sensors, I can see a bunch of different sensors. And if I just scroll down, this one right here is a temperature, humidity, pressure, gas, and I can see right here that it has multiple pins. So it has a voltage input, it has a 3 volt, it has ground, it has clock, it has data in, data out, and chip select. So I know that that's an SPI sensor. So for these sensors, SPI and I2C, I2C, they use a very specific communication protocol, and you cannot connect these to your hub. So if you do have your Vint hub you will not be able to connect that at the current moment. So that's a little bit of a teaser. We are actually coming out with a device that will be able to talk to these sensors, but at the current moment, you cannot do that. So that's an overview of the different types of sensors that we have for third party, the very common ones. So we're going to go through these all now and actually show you how to interface with them and get a little bit more in depth with the wiring. So if we take a look here, we have the Fidget cable, and this is what we're going to be using to actually interface with these third-party sensors. So if we take a look at a Fidget cable, so it just has the 3 wires and a little connector on the end. If you take the connector off, you'll see 3 wires kind of split up that look like this. So you have a red cable, a white cable, and a black cable. So the white cable, again, we mentioned this earlier, it is what is carrying the signal. So if you're, say, using an analog sensor, that is what is actually going to be carrying the voltage, and that's what you're going to be measuring. The red is power, and the black is ground. So here we have those definitions again. And again, for analog, you're basically using all 3 wires. For digital sensors, you're only using the signal, so the white, and the ground, the black. So now we're going to just go through a little bit of an example of how to actually use these sensors. So the first one I'm going to take is that light sensor we saw. So again, this is a really, really common type of sensor. And if you do have Arduinos in your classroom, you probably have a few of these laying around. So this is that light sensor. It has 3 connectors. And what I'm going to be doing is connecting this to a Fidget cable so that I can use it with my VIN hub. So I'm taking my wire that I've split up here, and I'm just going to figure out by looking at this device where I should put my wires. So there's generally always going to be an indication. So here we can see, let's make this larger. Here we can see there's a minus by this pin right here, and there's a S by this pin. So what that tells you is that the minus is ground. So that's where we're going to want to put our black cable. And the signal is S. So that's where we're going to want to put our white cable. So, and then the last one will be power. So that will be red. So basically there'll always be some kind of indication of how to configure your cables. But if you're not sure, you can always email us and we can give you some help on that. But basically what I'm going to do then is just taking this device, I'm going to take my wires, I'm going to find the signal, I'm going to put the white wire, I'm going to find ground and put the black wire, and then I'm going to put the red wire on power. So I now have this set up here. That looks something like that. It's going to be hard to focus on that, but there we go. So I have my wires now connected. You can see the S is white, the black is on negative, and red is positive. So then what we can do from there is we can take our hub. So everyone should have a hub from their getting started kit. And I'm just going to plug this into port 0, but you can, of course, plug it into any of the ports. So now I have a third-party light sensor connected to my VIN hub. I'm going to plug it into USB here, just like this. So I have my USB connection to my third-party sensor. And then I'll try to put this in view here. So there we go. What I will do now is I'm going to share my screen again, and we're just going to take a quick look at the code that would be required to run that. So if you've gone through the Getting Started kit, this will look very familiar to you. So this is a Python program. And essentially, I'm not going to go through all of the coding. If you are interested in that, we do have videos on our website that show the basics of Phidgets. But essentially what I'm going to show you is because we are measuring a voltage, I'm going to be using the voltage input class. So this is something that you may not have seen before. I'm going to create my sensor just like I always do, but now this time I'm creating a voltage input because we're reading a voltage. I'm going to address my sensor just like we always do, and I'm going to open my sensor. So this is being done in Python, but again, you could do this in Java, C#, Swift. After I do that, I just have a while loop here. So basically, I'm just spinning in this while loop, and I'm just measuring the voltage. So here I can see I have a light sensor. Its value is between 0 and 5 volts, and I'm just printing that out. So if I run this program here, we can see that we're getting a voltage from the sensor, which is about 0.5 volt. So that from what we can understand now, is indicating that, I'm in a room full of light, so that must mean that it's getting a decent amount of light. If I cover it with my hand, so I'm going to cover this with my hand, we can see that voltage go up near 5 volts. So from what that kind of tells me is that for this specific sensor, a low light condition is a higher voltage and a high light condition is a lower voltage. So what you could do with that in your program is do something where you're saying, hey, if light sensor dot get voltage, let's say it is greater than 2.5. So if it's greater than 2.5, we know that, hey, the room is getting dark. And then if you had some other sensors connected, you could maybe turn on a light or do something else with that information. But that's an example of something you could do. So here we don't have an output because, again, our room is kind of light. But then if I cover it with my hand, we can say, hey, room is getting dark. But again, that is the exact same code that you would use for any third-party sensor that is an analog sensor. The next one I'm going to take a look at is the switch that we had. So that switch, again, looks something like this. We'll see if we can get it to focus on this. So that is that switch there. So you can kind of see if I tilt this, you may be able to see that little blob of mercury kind of going back and forth. So that is the tilt switch. So again, if we take a look at the pinout from this picture here, so if we take a look at the pinout of this switch, we have the negative here, which is indicating the black wire, and we have the S here, which indicates that's where the white wire should be. And again, because this one now is a digital sensor, it's just saying on and off. We don't need the third wire. So if I go ahead and I take my cable, so I'm going to take the cable that I had with the light sensor. So this is our light sensor cable. I'm going to disconnect these now. And what I'm going to do is connect the our little tilt sensor here. So I'm going to put the black cable on ground, and I'm going to put the white cable on the signal. So we can kind of see there, it's a little bit blocked, but the black wire is by the negative symbol, and the white wire is on the S cable connection there. So what we would do again is we would take this now, we would plug it into the Vint hub, just like we did with the other device. So now I have that plugged in here. And our code, because we are trying to accept a digital value, our code will look something like this. So we can go to this piece of code here. So again, we're accepting a digital value. So that switch is going to either going to output a kind of 3.3 volt or a 0. So we're trying to accept a digital value. So we are using a digital input, and we are doing the exact same thing. We're creating, we're addressing, then we're opening. And basically here we have the while loop that is just saying, it's just reading the state of the switch. So if we run this, we can see that in the current position, the switch is not activated. But then if I tilt it, so let's say this way or this way, we can see that now the switch is activated. So not activated and then activated, just like that. So again, there's many different types of kind of digital sensor that will output a digital value. And you would interface with them in the exact same way as we're doing here. You would just connect up your white wire and your black wire. You would create a digital input object, and then you would be good to go from there. The last one that we took a look at was this one right here. So I don't have this one on hand. I have a similar device, which is produced by us, which is the power switch here, the power plug Fidget. And essentially this works in the exact same way. You would connect basically we can kind of see it in this diagram here, in this picture here. So there's a plus and a minus on these terminals. So you would connect your white wire to the plus symbol. You would connect your black wire to the negative, just like we've been doing. And then you would create a project that looks something like this. So you would be using a digital output now because you're trying to output to that device to control it. And you would essentially just create an output, you'd address it, you would open it, and then you would just set the state true or false. So by setting the state true, you're turning the voltage on, which indicates to that device that you want it to turn on. And then when you turn it off, it will be turning it off. So very simple to do and very useful because again, there's so many different types of these third-party sensors. And again, you may have it in your classroom. You may have these sensors in your classroom from a previous kind of semester or previous, another teacher in your school may have these sensors available. So you can definitely take advantage of those and use them in your Phidgets projects. We appreciate everyone tuning in today for this webinar, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you.